This town picked up miscreants the way a dog picked up fleas. He even passed a place where it looked like some wayfarer had made a small fire pit on a sheet of metal and a ring of rocks. It was a wonder the fool hadn't burned the entire building to the ground. Wax eased open the side door and stepped into an alleyway between the hotel and the store beside it. The gunshots earlier would have been heard, and somebody might come looking. Best to stay out of sight. Wax eased around the back of the store, stepping quietly across the red clay ground. The hillsides here were overgrown with weeds, except for the entrance to an old cellar. Wax wound around it, then paused, eyeing the wood frame pit. Maybe he knelt down beside the opening, peering downward. There had been a ladder here once, but it had rotted away. The remnants were visible below in a pile of old splinters. The air smelled musty and wet, and of a hint of smoke. Someone had been burning a torch down there. Wax dropped a bullet into the hole and leaped in, gun out. As he fell, he filled his metal mine, decreasing his weight. He was twin-born, a ferrochemist as well as an allomancer. His allomantic power was steel pushing. His ferrochemical power, called skimming, was the ability to grow heavier or lighter. They were a powerful combination of talents. He pushed against the bolt below him, slowing his fall so he landed softly. He returned his weight to normal, or, well, normal for him. He often went about at 3/4 of his normal weight, making himself lighter on his feet, quicker to react. He crept through the darkness. It had been a long, difficult road, finding where Bloody Can was hiding. In the end, the fact that Feltrell had suddenly emptied of other bandits, wanderers, and unfortunates had been a major clue. Wax stepped softly, working his way deeper into the cellar. The scent of smoke was stronger here, though the light was fading. Though the light was fading, he made out a fire pit beside the earthen wall. That and a ladder that could be moved into place at the entrance. That gave him pause. It indicated that whoever was making their hideout in the cellar, could be Tan or it could be someone else entirely, was still down here, unless there was another way out. Wax crept forward a little farther, squinting in the dark. There was light ahead. Wax cocked his gun softly, then drew a little vial out of his mist cloak and pulled the cork with his teeth. He downed the whiskey and steel in one shot, restoring his metal reserves. He flared his steel. Yes, there was metal ahead of him, down the tunnel. How long was this cellar? He assumed it would be small, but he had assumed it would be small, but the reinforced wood sides indicated something deeper, longer. More like a mine shaft. He crept forward, focused on those metal lines. Someone would have to aim a gun if they saw him, and the metal would quiver, giving them a chance to push the weapon out of their hands. Nothing moved. He slid forward, smelling musty, damp soil, fungus, potatoes left to bud. He approached a trembling light, but could hear nothing. The metal lines did not move. Finally, he got close enough to make out a lamp hanging by a hook on a wooden beam near the wall. Something else hung at the center of the tunnel. A body? Hanged? Waxillian cursed softly and hurried forward, wary of the trap. It was a corpse, but it left him baffled. And at first, it seemed years old. The eyes were gone from the skull, skin pulled back against the bone. It didn't stink and wasn't bloated. He thought he recognized it. Bjorman, the coachman who had brought mail and weathering from the more distant villages around the area. That was his uniform, at least, and it seemed like his hair. He'd been one of Tan's first victims, the disappearance that set Wax hunting. That had only been 2 months back. He's been mummified, Wax thought, prepared and dried like leather. He felt revolted. He'd gone drinking with Bjorman on occasion, and though the man cheated at cards, he'd been an amiable enough fellow. The hanging wasn't an ordinary one either. Wires had been used to prop up Bjorman's arms so they were out to the sides, head cocked, mouth pried open. Wax turned away from the gruesome sight, his eye twitching. Careful, he told himself. Don't let him anger you. Keep focus. He would be back to cut Bjorman down. Right now, he couldn't afford to make the noise. At least he knew he was on the right track. This was Bloody Tan's lair. There was another patch of light in the distance. How long was this tunnel? He approached the pool of light and here found another corpse. This one hung on the wall sideways. Anarel, a visiting geologist who had vanished soon after Bjorman. Poor woman. She'd been dried in the same manner, body spiked to the wall in a very specific pose, as if she were on her knees inspecting a pile of rocks. Another pool of light drew him onward. Clearly, this wasn't a cellar. It was probably some kind of smuggling tunnel, left over from the days when Feltrell had been a booming town. Tan hadn't built this, not with those ancient wooden supports. Wax passed another 6 corpses, each lit by its own glowing lantern, each arranged in some kind of pose. One sat in a chair, another strung up as if flying, a few stuck to the wall. The later ones were more fresh, the last one freshly dead. Wax didn't recognize the slender man who hung with his hand to his head in a salute. Rust and ruin, Wax thought. This isn't Bloody Tan's lair. It's his gallery. Sickened, Wax made his way to the next pool of light. This one was different, brighter. As he approached, he realized that he was seeing sunlight streaming down from a square cut in the ceiling. The tunnel led up to it, probably to a former trapdoor that had rotted and broken away. The ground sloped in a gradual slant up the hull. Wax crawled up the slope, then cautiously poked his head out. He'd come up in a building, though the roof was gone. The brick walls were mostly intact, and there were 4 altars at the front, just to Wax's left. An old chapel with a survivor. It seemed empty. Wax crawled out of the hole, Hysterian at the side of his head, coat marred by dirt from below. The clean, dry air smelled good to him. Each life is a performance, a voice said, echoing in the ruined church. Wax immediately ducked to the side, rolling up to an altar. But we are not the performers, the voice continued. We are the puppets. Tan, Wax said, come out. I have seen God, lawkeeper, Tan whispered. Where was he? I have seen death himself with nails in his eyes. I have seen the survivor whose life... Wax scanned the small chapel. It was cluttered with broken benches and fallen statues. He rounded the side of the altar, judging the sound to come from the back of the room. Other men wonder, Tan's voice said, but I know I'm a puppet. We all are. Did you like my show? I worked so hard to build it. Wax continued along the building's right wall, his boots leaving a trail in the dust. He breathed shallowly, a line of sweat creeping down his right temple. His eye was twitching. He saw corpses on the walls in his mind's eye. Many men never get a chance to create true art, Tan said, and the best performances are those which can never be reproduced. Months, years spent preparing, everything placed right. But at the end of the day, the rotting will begin. I couldn't truly mummify them. I didn't have time or resources. I could only preserve them long enough to prepare for one show. Tomorrow it will be ruined. You were the only one to see it. Only you. I figure we're all just puppets, you see. The voice was coming from the back of the room, near some rubble that was blocking Wax's view. Someone else moves us, Tan said. Wax ducked around the side of the rubble, raising hysteria. Tan stood there, holding Leslie in front of him, her mouth gagged, her eyes wide. Wow. Wax froze in place, gun raised. Leslie was bleeding from her leg and from her arm. She'd been shot, and her face was growing pale. She'd lost blood. That's how Tan would have been able to overpower her. Wax grew still. He didn't feel anxiety. He couldn't afford to. It might make him shake, and shaking might make him miss. He could see Tan's face behind Leslie. The man held a garrote around her neck. Tan was a slender, fine-fingered man. He'd been a mortician. Black hair, thinning, worn greased back. A nice suit, now shone with blood. Someone else moves us, lawman, Tan said softly. Leslie met Wax's eyes. They both knew what to do in this situation. Last time he'd been the one captured, people always tried to use them against one another. In Leslie's opinion, that wasn't a disadvantage. She'd have explained that if Tan hadn't known the two of them were a couple, he might have killed her right off. Instead, he kidnapped her. That gave him a chance to get out. Waxillian took sight and Leslie blinked. 1, 2, 3. Wax fired. In the same instant, Tan yanked Leslie to the right. Shot broke the air, echoing against clay bricks. Leslie's head jerked back as Wax's bullet took her just above the right eye. Blood sprayed against the clay brick wall beside her. She crumpled. Wax stood, frozen, horrified. No, that isn't the way. It can't. The best performances, Tan said, smiling and looking down at Leslie's figure, are those that can only be performed once. Wax shot him in the head. That is the prologue. I'll probably read just a little bit more of this. So I think I've skipped chapter 1 and go to a little chunk of chapter 2. In chapter 1, we find, and this is still in the stages of revision, one thing that I've added to a different version of this prologue that I need to move into this one is a letter Wax is carrying in his pocket that you don't know quite what it is in the prologue. In chapter 1, you find out that his uncle, who was the lord of his house back in Ellendale, the primary city has passed away, and Wax has inherited the house title. And the letter was informing him of this, and he was going to ignore it. Following the events in the prologue, he finds that he's left somewhat changed as a man, and he decides that he just can't keep doing what he's been doing, and he accepts the half invitation, half order to come and become House Lord in Ellendale. Chapter 1, we find him 5 months later at a party in Ellendale in which he is just completely bored out of his skull. He wanders to the back balcony, thinks for a little bit in the mist, and then jumps out and goes patrolling through the city with his guns because he's bored of parties. He runs across a robbery and is unable to shoot the people who are participating in it. He just can't. It's the first time he's had to try to shoot someone since the events in the prologue. He's unable to do it. He freezes. He flees away, and as the constables come to get the bandits, so he goes back to his house and he puts away his guns. Essentially, it says, "I just can't be this anymore. I am now no longer Wax the Lawman. I am Waxilian Ladrian, the House Lord of Ladrian House." So, chapter 2 is 6 months after that. And this is where we kind of start digging into the plot of the story a little bit. "How's my cravat?" Waxilian asked, studying himself in the mirror, turning to the side and tugging at the silver necktie. "Impeccable as always, my lord," Tillon said. The butler stood with hands clasped behind his back, a tray with steaming tea sitting beside him on the serving stand. Waxilian hadn't asked for tea, but Tillon had brought it anyway. Tillon had a thing about tea. "Are you